for assault because they were seen to be selling out, because they were participating, in politics where the majority of the people in South Africa were not. So they were looked at as sellouts. So if you can just go more or deeper on that one, on the tricameral. You spoke about and I know of something called Ibrute Bond, but did it start as an Afrikaner bond, or was it something else? Because I know that that Ibrute Bond was more, it was based in University of Stellenbosch, I'm told. So did it change from Afrikaner bond to Brute Bond, or were these two separate things? I think that those are the two questions that I have for you. Moving on to remember what Prof. Mkhize said. Prof, about the trust that people have at IEC, and I'm saying starting with the CEO and the PO and the rest of the IEC colleagues. We've been listening for the last 3-4 months to different speakers, especially journalists, speaking to us, and they were invited to talk to us directly and not ekalin, but tell us not what they think about us, but what their readers, what the rest of the electorate thinks about the IEC. And all of them, without exception, said what Professor Mkhize was saying. What in the eyes of the public, our work we do immaculately. And there are no complaints, save for a few things, such as VMD. But other than that, but of course, there will be those who, no matter what type of best training you can give to people, but they will decide to do things on, ngohlobo lwabo. She spoke, Professor Mkhize, about into, even if you know that somebody politically resides with a particular party, but in the way that we do our thing, our work, there is no differentiation. You cannot detect impartiality. But we have insisted with the PO to say, but as for no cause, but we will attend the meetings open on board. As he has gone to in your DNA as an IEC person. I have made my comment already about subordination of military, to the political. But apathy, you are saying that there's nothing that the IEC can do about that. We've come to understand that. But we can't be indifferent. We've got to do whatever needs to be done by way of outreach and voter education. We cannot just sit back and say, no, Tina, we've provided logistics, materials, and everything. That is what I remember about what you said, Prof. Mkhize. The CEO, I know, as I said, that there will be some questions coming. Our colleagues are really, especially about the wasted votes, the CEO. When you say, because I know that we've been called upon to manage SRC elections, and the constitution of the SRC, of the university now, are incorporating the participation of independent candidates. No, not the constitution, but just the understanding is that the participation of independent candidates must happen, but that is not addressed in the constitution. So that if they will say, if I am popular, as the CEO was saying, I am popular and I come and win a number of votes, that will translate to 3 seats. Then I must be allowed to go and hunt for two of my people to come and occupy those other 2 seats, because they are my seats. That is the understanding there. And I know that when when you first addressed us in a meeting that I attended, when you said DCO, there is no direct election of a president. I said to myself, say that to Mus, my man. Say that to one SA, those guys. Because there are people who are politically matured but who do not understand that part. Who think that they are popular, they will go and contest to be president of the country. So we've got our work cut out for us. Let me just end there. Those were just my comments and questions where there is a question mark at the end. Now, may I open an opportunity for questions? I will note the hands using the PKK approach. So as PKK approach. Okay, so I'm noting Mr. Dweber, and for the interest of everyone in the room, just introduce yourself, and I know most of the people across the room are IEC employees. But if you happen to be outside of the IEC, in fact, everybody, just introduce yourself and say what you do, region, municipality, or if you are outside, if you are an outside IEC person, just tell us who you are and who you represent. I'm noting Mr. Dweber. Are there any other hands? I'm noting Reverend Mluma. I'm noting Usibusiso Mkhaji. I'm noting Miss Mtwesi. So in that order, Masimameli again. There's a roving mic and it was, ne? Okay, thank you.
In the province. First, my question is to the two professors. Maybe their research was on one stream political organization in terms of the research to the formation of constitutional democracy. My question is, there was any documents that were coming from the PACs, the AZAPOs, or any other, like for instance, the Inkatha Freedom Party. Those documents maybe were used using CODESA, or they were not there. My second question will go again to the professors with regard to apathy. Maybe apathy is caused by the fact that there is a lack of service delivery from the ruling party. Or maybe the apathy is caused by people who do not want to vote. We have been seeing that there is the people that are not voting now. There was a period that we were saying people are coming to vote in numbers, but now people are not voting as we speak. To the DCO as I'm sitting now here as the IEC official, you're saying today the parliament is sitting for the amendment of the legislation. We are saying by next year maybe we must start the program. Are we ready? Is the government ready to come up with those amendments? Because there is a fact that you indicated that constituencies were not part of the judgment. Is it going to be like the government or the IEC will go and formulate other ways of conducting the elections, or we are going to use the same system, because you spoke of the regions. We are going to say maybe OR Tambo, you have got 1 million votes, so you can have 4 or 5 independents standing in your constituency. So there is a confusion on myself around that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Ola Mluma from Butterworth, Amatole region. My question, I would say to the professors, or maybe the UTCO may take part. As a man of the word, Professor, during the time of Moses, he was known by Pharaoh, and he was leading at that time in Egypt. But here comes another Pharaoh who knew nothing about Moses, and the persecution began. Where I'm going about this is that now voting is very important to everybody in South Africa. And the National Party government, maybe they knew that they are going down in terms of voting power. But they fell off and they had to give up in terms of voting power. But the heritage of our country, of us, I would say black people, which is land, and also the economic power in this country, is being controlled by the minority. Now, I just need your view, your views. Seemingly, the current government, I would say in my own view, something is collapsing. And they don't seem to see or understand that, you know, their leadership or the current government, I would say, things are collapsing. So do you think, as people who were leaders back then, during the UDF and other structures that you are working with today, do you think the current government understands the importance of land to our people? Or they are just going with the flow of letting it being controlled by the minority? Because we are only having this power as black people of voting, but in terms of economy and land, we are out. And I'm worried that there will be time where it's either within the current government or there will be another government who will come and take over. And there will be leaders who would control South Africa, like the likes of Museveni, the leaders, where we will go for elections and they will win at all costs. Doesn't matter whether they lose in terms of voting, but they will win because they are in power. Are we not going there as a South Africa?
I'll make this one quick. My question is directed to everyone on the stage. Anyone can take this. Considering how civic society with Imbumba, Yamanyama, in fact, all the Mbumbas from your native vigilance, Imbumba, Eliliso Lesizwe, and to your Native Educators Association, those civic society organizations, what they would be now. They are the ones that pushed and gotten people onto the voters' roll and made sure that people are voting. Now, you look at a current situation where some of the youth will complain about that there is no accountability. Now, according to how the CEO has put it, we go our own lane. We can't influence certain things. But how do we get a civic society that pushes for certain things, for instance, within accountability? The US is going to the midterm elections in November, and we could use something like a midterm as a tool for accountability. How do we communicate that message using what we have as heritage of how we have gotten to where we are now, and therefore talking future?
Thank you. I'm Twesi from C442 Umzimvubu. I don't have questions, just comments. Starting from Umama Umkize, noting the fact that as IEC, we are doing our best in what we are doing, and then we may not have fears on voter turnout when they refrain not to vote. Then I will go to our DCO, Kumpako, as the outreach officer eba sefielding, in that Tina singabinayo into ACT ilele kuti, we are lacking resources as field workers ku outreach department. If ungasenzela lo favor yokubana sifumane resources ku tata ordinal is just to comprehend by saying you remind me of the professors in the early 90s, UNITRA, abo Professor Pinari, Professor Dupri, Siabulela, by gathering the info, value it, sharing it with us. And then when you talk of Abotata Usishuba, I relate them to Abotata Ututu, of whom they played an important role being religious leaders in our history. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the first round of the questions. If we should go to the next round, may I request that we go straight to the point and ask a question, please. I'm told that we'll be cut off soon here because we're connected to Ezindozikoy. So let's be mindful of time. May I give you the roving mic, or you prefer to come here to respond? The mic. I'll do both.
No, she's given it to me, so. Okay, in terms of the shallow knowledge, Dr. Khubusana was the only person ever elected African representative to a statutory body, provincial or national, in pre the tricameral period when, as we know, people were brought into the system in a very inadequate way. So he was elected as the MPC for Tembuland in 1913. In 14 constituencies in the Eastern Cape, African voters had a say over who won. In 6 of them, they had the decisive say. In 1883, in Victoria East, they also used the system to make sure that their candidate won by using the plumping vote, which was each voter had 2 votes per voter, and the local activists and leaders from 10 different localities in Victoria East, Dikeni and so on, said we must all vote for that one person. So he knows, like the Afrikaner Bond is mobilizing ethnically, let us mobilize to get our point across. And they won that election in 1883. That led to attempts by the white politicians to take away the vote from black voters. So it's always gone give a little and take a lot away. And in 1887, Tungumlongmo was passed, the Voters Registration Act, to try to take away elements of the vote, so that if people lived on tribal land, their property didn't count for a vote. Again, when Cecil John Rhodes came in 1894 with the Glenn Gray Act, he taxed people so that they would leave the land to go and work as migrant workers and lose the vote and so on. So there were always those attacks on people, but they were influential in a small amount, but it was a challenge they took up, and they lobbied within what was possible, but no one can think that that was the answer to the future of South Africa, because colonialism by its very nature was an act of dispossession and violence, and it was not going to be given up. Which brings me to the part of the Reverend about the National Party. They were pushed into a corner, but they would never have thought in 1987, having won 74% of the white vote in the whites-only election, that they would be out of power in 7 years. And even in 1989, when de Klerk decided to unban, he said we could hold out for another 15 years, but they were gone in 4 years. So they did not control that process. But I think the very important point that gets raised in terms of the land and the economy is that you do not undo 340 years of systematic dispossession and forced inequality in even 30 years. We've seen that. And I'll come back to that just now. It's a very deep-rooted structure, over centuries that was created. And the people who were talking about the Constitution in 1988 and in Lusaka were not unaware of that. In our seminar to discuss the guidelines, there were over 100 people from 20 countries, delegates there. And Thabo Mbeki said, Fidel Castro has warned us, don't just say nationalization and think the rest is going to be easy. The question is, what are we going to do on day one when we arrive there and we have to run the economy? It's a huge challenge that we're not ready for. So I do not think the people pre-1990 totally underestimated the challenge that would come to change the system. Penuel Maduna in 1992 said This has to be a freedom and food, freedom and bread constitution. If we don't bring about the changes, fundamental changes, the government will find popular opposition and be kicked out in the end. And I think, in a sense, that's where we are today. I mean, none of us here, I think, are saying this is a beautiful dream, and it's still great today because we've got the Constitution. I think that the CEO said that we've got a dissonance today between a very good Constitution and a political situation where people's lived reality doesn't relate to it in many cases. And for me, there's too much easy populism that says change the Constitution and everything will come right. It's rather change the politics. Where's the delivery 30 years after democracy? If there are only 27 municipalities that pass their audits, how can the democratic government be delivering to the people? And that is the most important thing. So it's a complicated thing. It's not either or. I mustn't talk too long if we're going to be switched off. Maybe I'll come back to one or two others, questions when I've looked at the PAC in Carter and Zapo. I think it's very important. If you read the book, we say this is a book about the Constitution Committee. It's one thread of the ANC struggle, not even its whole struggle or other people's struggles. And I think from Sharpeville and the 60s, the PAC played a very important role. The 70s are the black consciousness decade. Many of the people in the Constitution Committee, like Bridget Mabandla and Maduna, came from SASO office bearers and so on. And Zola Square was an Africanist. He was known for his strong feelings of being Africanist. And his studying in the GDR strengthened that feeling. So within the ANC, in the mid-80s, there was a lot of, those three strands of thinking are consistent in the liberation struggle. Wherever you are positioned, they come through. But what I try to say here is that it was the internal struggles that made it possible for this vision and leadership from Lusaka to come in. I think it's very important. The micro-negotiations that happened on the trade union floors, community protests, the SACC, and within that, many different political tendencies are what, in a sense, preempted the later negotiations. And what I try to show in the book is that once the boundaries were dissolved between internal and external, the people in Lusaka started learning much more and being up to date, also on women's issues and a lot of other issues. They learnt from having been cut off. The PAC and Zapo obviously didn't decide to go into the negotiations, and unfortunately they fared very poorly in the election. But historically, they were very, very important, and those ideas that they propounded are still very prominent today. In fact, we go through cycles historically. Someone's written about the Imbumba Yamanyama and Imbumba Ililiso Lomzi, or Abansundu. So Abansundu and Amanyama have two different meanings. The one can just be a black reaction to whites. Unsundu goes beyond that. There's an African perception of what that is. So people are writing about that at MNU and so on. So there's cycles. 70s is BC, 80s is Congress, 2010s is Black Lives Matter and Black Consciousness coming in a new form. So to me, they're all part of the same thing, not either or, one or the other. But historically, the 80s was the ANC that took the lead and brought about this change.
Let me just make a comment on the voter apathy thing as well as the bill, because I was actually quite upset at this rule by constitutional, all this thing where in South Africa we run to constitutional court on issues that need to be settled socially and politically. To me, it seems clear, and I know that for the IEC you stay out of this, but to me it seems that this, that there is the word abuse is not the process, but there is a kind of a rule by litigation, which was brought really into this country in many ways by donor funding, that has consistently pushed this idea that we litigate to solve political problems that need to be resolved through long, extensive discussion and voter engagement and the rest of it. So for me, I have a strong dislike of the constant use of litigation, having myself once taken a minister to court. But even then, that once was like, okay, I'm just going to do this. But at the end of it, I thought this was actually stupid. Normally, we shouldn't do things like this. So that bill for me, or the intervention that is being made was made, for me, was regressive and reactionary, because it's saying we can't defeat the ANC electorally, let's go and find another method to manipulate systems, instead of engaging society. And I thought that what Parliament should have done was go back and revisit the Constitution to strengthen the original concept of the current electoral system, rather than trying to constantly adapt because of litigation. We should in fact be strengthening, precisely because of the reasons why this current electoral system was put in place. The people that came up with this electoral system understood the South African problem. And so when I've engaged with many of the clever blacks that we all have to engage with in my circles, I've said, first of all, you must be so out of touch with politics. I mean, I come from KZN, people are killing each other at municipal level. There is ward politics there, and yet people are killing each other. So you are actually asking for hell in South Africa by changing a system that forces us to share and cooperate. The current system makes us have to share. It makes us have to cooperate. That's why it was put in place in the first place, such that even if you are this little right-wing formation, there's a share for you here. Even if you are a little populist, there's a share for you. So the current system is not perfect, but it forces us to share, and the fact that it forces us to look across. So I can't sit in KZN and just be, they always accuse us of Zulufication. They don't understand us, but they accuse us. But it does force you to think, oh, I have to go make alliance over there to grow my pool. Now imagine a system where I can sit here in my local area and be a strong man. They are taking us into a system of warlordism, because I will now entrench myself locally to get that threshold. That means I need inkabi mus. I'm going to need all these things. So that clever black thing of who we litigate, and it's an abuse of the liberalism that's within the Constitution as well. So I am opposed to this change. And I think I've persuaded enough people who were busy advancing it on their platforms, or the radio broadcast media, to say, guys, did you think about it? You're unkabiizing our politics. But, that's that. And that relates to voter apathy, because in the end, it's only a political move that energizes voters. And that can be negative and positive. You can get a Trump effect, where you get a serious energization that's also very conservative. Or you can get a radical effect, like in Chile, where the young people of Chile, who were the fees must fall of Chile, the new government of Chile is those fees must fall of 2010, 2011, if I remember. The student movement of Chile is the government now. So you can get both effects, but it's only political contestation that leads to voter re-energization, which I think the IEC needs to, I don't know how your protocols work, but you must be careful not to get drawn into political drama, right? So you keep your distance somewhat from society, and sometimes you come, you engage us, hey, guys vote, and you do your things, but you keep your distance somewhat, because you don't want to get drawn into the social drama. So let me just say it's tough for the IEC there. But we trust you because we hardly see you trying to hit us over the head over anything. We just see you, we give you our thing, yeah, you're polite, say, I vote. I mean, I voted in 2014, I think I was in Johannesburg. I wound up there. I had my ID. I was like, yo, man, you're a voter. I found some JPPR, PNR school there in Pretoria, whoever, some Afrikaner school, walked in, I was like, it's a voter. And then it was like, yes, thank you. But no, I voted. It was like, yeah, we can vote in this country. It's nice. I don't have to be where I live. I can vote where I want. It was beautiful, you know? And so that's the thing about the IEC. There's no drama there. So it's tough. Think about it. Then I want to make a last comment on land and economy, as it is controlled by a minority. They've got a very rigid and locked-in system in the supply chain, in property values, in a range of things. But we know that already. This is not a surprise. So it means we are unprepared. It's not that they are unprepared. If we could prepare in terms of the political system, so we were prepared there, but we were unprepared economically. And we are now not just on a back foot, we are on a serious, we are way behind them. So, and I can say this, that I don't think that that faction of capital knew that we would be on a back foot. They didn't know. We put ourselves on the back foot, and primarily by losing our grip on education. Not because we don't own Checkers or we don't own ShopRite. The reason why they went ahead of us, they convinced us that first of all, we convinced ourselves, and this is a whole nother conversation, that in fact, we don't need to build our schools up. What we ran for, and this is the same mistake African Americans made, but it was a principled decision. We made the mistake of believing that by sending African kids into white schools, they would improve economically, as opposed to understanding that by sending children outside of their communities, we disinvested from our local education bases. To this day, the best lawyers and most best trained people that I meet at Eastern Cape, Bapume Unitra, they came from institutions that ironically were the Bantustan institutions, but where the black education tradition was strong. Everywhere you go in this country, your weakest graduates, you don't want to tell you this, but I'm telling you now, increasingly, your weakest graduates are coming from Model C schools because they have no rooting at all. They are psychologically lost. I am sorry to tell you that, parents, and I know this with my child, that is why we have to do double work at home. Because let me just make one example of this. Black boys that are sent to Model C schools and private schools, they get out of those systems, many of them on drugs, alcohol. They struggle to adjust socially because those schools, for all the good things they do in teaching them how to read and write, they don't teach them what it means to be a strong black man. These are cultural questions that you need to root your children in a strong sense of self, because when they get somewhere, they've got to be able to fight and be strong and advance the common agenda. What happens is our kids get into those corporates, they get into those places, they collapse. They start, the only thing you can do now is, well, I just want to buy my car, buy my house, and just live that life. That's why now Abosongezo Zibi are saying, hey, black professionals, Nikupi, hey, black professionals, you've disinvested from the system. They're sitting in corporates unable to even open a stock file. They're sitting in corporates unable to even think about the future because we're saddled with debt. That's the problem of the economy. And it's not popular to say that, but it does lie in those things. We don't train our kids in mathematics. We opted for something else. We're not training our kids in agriculture. We buy them at Danone. We're not training our kids in basic crafts and industries. Our grandmothers are better with their hands than we are. These are not small things. Ubutyebe ezinkomeni, how many kids know how to run cattle today? We think these things are small. We've lost it. So it means the current, okay, it's not IEC's job. It means myself in education and others have to, we are fighting to say this is the issue. So I just want to say that The children, again, I want to repeat, that went to those Model C schools, arrive at university and collapse, and then they try to radicalize themselves. Ask me today where the fees must fall generation is. They are not in corporate jobs, they are in psychological collapse.
We go back to the mundane now. We specialize in the mundane in the IEC. Thank you for that. Yes. Mr. Dweber, will we be ready in 2024? In 2020, when the Concord made its handed out its judgment, we went to the portfolio committee to sensitize the committee on the family of electoral systems available in the world. But we also forced a discussion on a time frame. And we said in 2020 then that any electoral reform that yields sub-provincial constituencies must have been finalized in October 2021 already. That deadline has come and gone. The deadline that Parliament is working towards now is an extended deadline of December this year. If the bill is passed in its current form, we will make it work for 2024. If, however, it is amended to include new constituencies, we are on record having said that whether it's passed in December this year, it is not implementable for 2024. Our planning scenario, Mr. Dweber should know, is that there's no secret. We know when the next election will be. The Constitution tells us that an election must be held within 90 days of the end of term. The last national and provincial elections were in May 2019. We know that the current term of legislatures and parliament will end mid-May 2024. And 90 days from then gives you up to August. On our part, we are predicating our preparations on being ready on the first day within that 90-day period, so that if the president decides to call an election, we can't say to the country, we are not ready to deliver, as though we do not know we have an election coming. The questions on apathy, we've deliberately never used the word apathy in the Electoral Commission because we feel that you're passing judgment without properly understanding the causes of the disengage. And increasingly, because of our longitudinal surveys and studies that we've done, we know now that in many cases it's not apathy, it's people who are making a conscious decision to say, I am not going to participate, because for the many people, they still see their vote as a transactional, they don't realize the transactional value of that vote. Our electoral system is basically easy to understand. So our education must move towards what is in need for me, rather than this is how you vote. Because when you go to communities, they tell you, no, we know how to make an X. We know how to vote, but why must we still believe in democracy as a form of arranging our public affairs when in successive elections, having participated, our lot still remains the way they are. For people who voted in the past and are not participating, it is not apathy. They are not happy with their choices in the past, but interestingly, it shows you the weaknesses in our politics. They are not transferring their votes. We went as high as, I think it was 84% voter turnout, 70-something in 2009, and we are on a downward trajectory because the bulk of people who participated are opting out and not transferring their votes to newer parties, because research tells us, in their view, once elected into office, political parties are the same. So it's not about the procedural aspect, but it's about the substantive aspect of participation. Interestingly, we should not give up on young persons yet, because in the voter registration drive ahead of 2021, 91% of all people who visited voting stations and registered were people under the age of 29. And of those, 71% came out and voted. So once registered, young people are 10 times more likely to vote than any age cohort. while like consistent with the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, we are a young, increasingly young population. The fact that young people are underrepresented on the voters' roll must worry us, because they've also had proportionally, they've got fewer opportunities to register than some of us who've lived through a number of electoral cycles. Just by way of concluding, for my colleagues, it will be useful if you interact with the research things that we issue over time. For example, you'll find that Afrobarometer will have a particular set of outcomes when they release their statistics. It doesn't mean they are wrong, but their sample is different from some of the sampling that we use. For example, on voting day in each election, we have a representative sample study conducted by the HSRC. While outside of an election period, the findings mirror each other. On voting day, they are not comparable because we, on voting day, interview people who've just voted. Whereas when they do their sampling, they do a sampling of age-eligible people who've not experienced the voting process. That's why you could find that 91% of people will tell us we experienced the voting station staff to be friendly, knowledgeable. We believe our vote was, the elections were free and fair. We believe that the secrecy of our vote has been, was safeguarded, and that they trust the IEC. Whereas when you go to Afrobarometers, they'll tell you trust in the IEC has declined from what, 41% to about 37%. And I think that's the only currency we have. It interested me, and I think, Prof, maybe you understand this better than me. Even at the height of the dysfunction at the SABC, with Claudi at the helm, the SABC still rated higher. People's perception of the SABC was still higher than that of the IEC. Until I realized that whether the SABC is, there's Claudi at the helm, at 7:30 there'll be a news bulletin. Mubango will be on at whatever time it is, whereas we only interact with voters in 2.5-year cycles. So if you go to voters now, they'll rate us slowly, but if you go and interview the very same people in an election period, the perception tends to increase. The worst thing that drains us, that drags us down, is because people mistrust key political institutions. They mistrust political parties. They don't have trust for institutions of local government. And to the extent that we are seen to be delivering the outcomes of that process, we also suffer from the trust deficit that people have in those key institutions. Two things just to boast in the presence of visitors. I've never had an opportunity to thank you personally for delivering a generation-defining election in 2021. It was not easy. It was a difficult election. And to top it up, soon thereafter, with a clean audit from the AG, I think, thank you very much, colleagues, on behalf of the Commission. In May this year, the electoral integrity project released its international study they've looked at elections from 2011, I think, up to 2019. All democracies, except a few countries that they've not looked at. They look at 44 or 43 indicators that cover the 11 phases of the electoral cycle. Again, there, internationally, people think that we're doing good things. On the continent, we only came second to Cape Verde. Internationally, America can't compare with us. We are tied. We are tied with Australia. We have a long way to go to match the Denmark's, Finland's there, because there's a strong correlation between quality of life and trust in democratic institutions. So we have a long way to go. But the only thing that drags us down is not whether we can count on voting day, where 1 + 1 must always be 2. It was, what dragged our score down was the issues around party funding.
And we had also come out of the Tlokwe thing in 2016, so there were lingering questions around voter registration processes and our party funding regime. Because we've passed legislation to regulate party funding, we think that in future surveys, we should improve our scoring. But we do not do these things just because we want to look good on papers. We do this thing because if a person interacts with an official of the Electoral Commission, whether it's in 5 years or 2.5 years, they must leave that voting station with an endearing memory that my personhood was reaffirmed. I was treated with dignity, that I matter in spite of my circumstances, not because of my standing in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We are now at the end of our session. Let's not overstay our welcome. I want to thank the audience for the part of treating me well when I was standing up here. But Julie is coming to the PO. PO, you are doing the vote of thanks. Okay. Thank you.
She's just being sick. No, I'm not feeling well. I'm not feeling well. I've requested to Julie to give a vote of thanks. Maybe what I can just say, Prof, is that we are managing an election, and an election is an electoral process. And it's important to have this knowledge about what is happening around us who are working with political parties. So we cannot be blank about where we come from and where we're going and what is happening around us. Thank you very much for coming. To the 20-year looking professor, I really admire your work. It's very important to be straightforward and to be open about those things and not just say things that are likable. Thank you very much for making time. Mr. Shipuri, this is my boss. Thank you very much, sir. You have a way of explaining our legislation or the legislation that guides us so perfectly, because it's not all of us that are actually finding it easy to understand and to be encouraged to actually read those pieces of legislation. And it's always a pleasure to have knowledgeable people around us so that we can go, because we're doing a lot of engagement with citizens, non-election period and closer to election period, and now we're really forcing ourselves to do as much as possible. We cannot be discouraged by the fact that there's a decline in voter turnout. If there is a decline, if it continues to decline, it means we need to do even more of the work that we do. You are sitting in front of soldiers. These are the people that make sure that they deliver an election, a good election, with all the challenges, the infrastructure challenges that we're having in this community. I mean, in this province. We've told ourselves that what is happening in Sandton, it should happen here, regardless of the challenges that we face on election day. Thank you very much. And let me promise you this, we'll continue to invite you to our province. We'll continue to learn, and we are buying your book. That book, I want to read that book. Thank you very much. But Jules, you have your notes. Please say something. But before we say that, colleagues, thank you very much. I always admire what you do, but it's very nice to hear it from someone else, I think, so that we don't just blow. We're not seen as blowing our horns, but you also hear it from other people and knowledgeable people that know what is happening elsewhere in terms of how elections are managed, so that you can be encouraged more than anything in what we do. Jules, thanks for organizing these thought leaderships. You are really making us look good, I must say. We need to continue doing this, but it's not easy to actually make sure that these are of the standard. Thank you very much. But because you wrote something, I want you to say something. You have to. Thanks.
Thank you, Pia. Gosh, this is really going against protocol when I speak after the boss. Yeah, my job's pretty easy. I was originally tasked with it because you can hear our PEO is not feeling too well. It's easy. I don't have to do a PhD or be very learned, and that mine comes from the heart. So there's no formal education for that one. But thank you all very much for agreeing and traveling here and fitting in with us so well. It's been awesome. I would like to akin you guys to philosophy, politics, and economics. Because the philosophy is the history and the knowledge side of it. The politics is what we are living, and the economics is, call it the mundane, and the impact of. So this venue, I personally am a student of advanced African philosophy. So it means so much to me, you know, and what you are telling us means so much to me. What our DCEO is saying as well about us. We are proud. We are proud of the organization we work for. You know, and I've said it in a different forum as well. We offer voters or eligible South Africans the opportunity to be equal. When you come to our voting stations, we don't know if you're a billionaire or if you've lived under a bridge. When we count your votes, they count the same. One's not gold encrusted and the other one's not. You know, that moment of coming to us, you are an equal, and that makes us proud. And we're very happy to work for the organization that we do. And we've had, as the PO said, we've had very positive feedback. And the team that you've got here, majority of them here, are people that go out, as the PO said, do voter education. And as I said to you, Prof. Mkhize, as long as we don't educate the electorate and we have the low voter turnout, the minority are still going to rule the majority, albeit in a different aspect. You know, we need to change that, and our outreach team here and the colleagues will certainly endeavor their best to do that. Thank you all very much for coming. I think I'm pretty much done. And, oh, please forgive me, I must thank the sign language interpreters. Thank you very much, ladies. We really appreciate your gifts and your talents. Thank you so much. If somebody could just help me get those bags under there, we've just got a little token of appreciation for you. I certainly hope they've cooked. We've asked them to cook. We have asked them to cook. This is just a small token, just to remember your participation, your first participation. It's not the last, believe you me. You can climb up there, you're younger than me. I won't do it, very dignified. They're all the same, they're all the same. And colleagues, the books are at the back there with Zora. Am I correct, Zora? You have the books there with you. Some of you have reserved copies of them. So they are there, and I don't know how many extras there are. So if you've reserved, I've got your names. We know who you are. And they are going at 130 Rand each. That's half price. Professor Woodendaal has managed to knock the price down for us. Thank you very much. To my knowledge, lunch is supposed to be served here. Originally, we had asked for a different venue, but it looks as if they're serving it here. Please be with us. We're going to have to go and find out what's going on. Colleagues, sorry, guests and colleagues, I'm told that the lunch is now apparently on that side.